Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Super excited to be here with you tonight. I am David Fraga. I'm COO at InVision, and we have an amazing night lined up for you tonight. Thank you all for coming. Thanks also to everyone joining on the live stream from all around the world. We have a fantastic group of designers and product thinkers with us tonight. And just to give you a flavor of what I mean, let me share some of the companies and teams that are represented here with us tonight. Folks from Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Citi, Bloomberg, MasterCard, American Express, Intuit, Capital One, Wealthfront, TD Ameritrade, Oracle, State Farm, Deloitte Digital, Simple Finance, Edward Jones, Wells Fargo, and many more. You're in great company. So those of you here, look around, look at the person to your left, to your right. Afterwards, get to know these people because you've got some really sharp folks sitting with you. And for those of you joining via live stream, jump onto the chat on live stream or join the conversation via the hashtag #DesignPlus. So before we get started, let me ask just one question. By a show of hands, how many people here have used InVision before? Awesome. Well, look, our mission is to help teams create great experiences, not just through software, but also through great ideas and conversations like what we've got going on here tonight. So we couldn't be more excited to have you here with us, and really appreciate you being part of the conversation. So with that, should we get started? Let's do it. So I'm excited to introduce your superstar moderator for the evening. Adam Perlis is a UX and design thinking consultant, the head of and director of design and UX at Time Magazine. You may have seen him speak or see him speak soon at the Web Summit, South by Southwest, or Tech Open Air. He's an instructor at General Assembly, where he serves as a design thinking evangelist. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Adam Perlis and your superstar panel.
All right, guys, how's everybody doing tonight? Oh, wow, lively crowd for finance. I'm impressed. Great. Well, thank you guys all for being here, and good evening. And we are very excited for this panel today. Today we're going to be talking about design and how it influences the world of finance. And we have some very distinguished guests with us tonight, and I'm very excited that they're all here. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves so we can get started. And Ian, why don't we start with you?
Ian Collins from Simple. I'm the creative director there.
My name is Ryan Page. I work for Capital One. I'm the head of design for our card partnerships business out of Chicago.
My name is Steve Gates. I'm the global head of design for Citi here in New York City.
I'm Apeksha Garga, and I'm the director of UX at Wealthfront, and we're based in the Bay Area.
Great. Thank you guys so much. So I'm going to present a question to the group, and feel free, whoever would like to answer it first. So why do you guys think there's been such an aggressive push towards design centricity in the finance worlds? What's changed? Typically, finance isn't so sexy.
Sorry, I have to recover from being called sexy, as I'm sure you all do as well. I can start with it. I guess in a weird way, I don't know that finance is that different, right? I think that, somebody pointed out to me the other day, there's not a global head of design at like Microsoft, but there is at Citi. I think that at the end of the day, it just gets a bit more attention because I think everybody has a different relationship with their operating system than they do with their money. And I think that it's just because of that, whenever there are problems with it, it feels a bit more, it just feels different, right? But I also think that for us, the burden should be bigger than design. Because I think, maybe this is an overstatement, but for me, I think we're in an era where I think creatives have an opportunity to affect business in an era that we haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution, right? And I think that's why you see, chief creative officers and other things in these companies. But at least for me, I think my job is bigger than design. I think it's, at least for me, it's creativity, right? Because design is a byproduct. And I think that at a company like Citi that's been around for 204 years, the design group has been in existence for essentially 1 year. That means that they value it, but they need help getting the ideas out the door in a shape that people still care about.
That sounds great. Does anyone else want to chime in about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're late to it. I'm personally just glad we snuck in there before mattresses, because barely squeaked by. My personal take, I don't know how factual this is, but I'm assuming it's got to do something to do with the recession we recently had. People individually, consumers and everyone taking a kind of personal focus and looking at their finances and wanting to trust institutions. That was certainly a big catalyst for why Simple came into existence, was that kind of like Occupy Wall Street type era, and where all of a sudden all the media attention was on this thing that typically didn't get a lot of it. And that bred a lot of things, and Mint coming out and having this big kind of like, it's just design, and that's kind of like it. There's some good technology, but there's not really even them. They're just this design side. I think that helped quite a bit too, and that was certainly a big influence on Simple existing. So I'm glad we got in there. It's exciting because it's I think you kind of referenced this too, Steve, but it's like the final frontier. Like it's a difficult thing to design for because it's something that people just really don't want to look at, or at least that's been my experience in my past, not wanting to look at your bank. And so the challenge of designing something that people not only will look at, but actually really actively want to look at has been the biggest, like, that's what we're trying to shoot for at Simple, and I'm sure it's the same across the board here. And it's a really fun and relatively new challenge.
Excellent. And Ryan, were you going to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, design being important in finance is sort of a byproduct of it becoming important to business overall. I think when you see Harvard Business Review like talking about the value of design as a strategic capability, that's huge. Adaptive Path has a conference called Leading Experience, and Harvard Business Review is now going to be a partner with them. I'll tweet a discount code afterward. So I think those things are huge kind of for creating general momentum for design as a strategic value creator. And then, my thought is that finance in particular is kind of an information-based product. It's sort of really a series of promises on a ledger, and so that can be increasingly experienced through software and like technology that we have now. So the role of design to play is sort of hugely important in kind of advancing that.
Excellent. And Apeksha, can you tell us a little bit about Wealthfront's approach to this and where you guys are thinking?
Yeah, I think for us, really, I think what happened was financial industry was really a black box, and in the hands of experts. And then there were there was an availability of like new APIs which allowed you to open, fund and trade accounts electronically. And so a lot of new entrants like Wealthfront, Lending Club, we were enabled to break into an industry that was otherwise owned by large institutions. And so really technology for us enabled like the consumerization of finance. And when you enter into the consumer realm, I think it's just absolutely imperative now to design an elegant product that that people would find easy to blend into their everyday rhythm. And so for us, really the way we can win against any of these large financial institutions is through design and a deep commitment to design. So, yeah.
So that actually is a really good segue because I think that one of the things that finance has done a really good job of, and maybe even more so than other industries, is bringing in design thinking, talking about agile development, agile design. Can some of you guys talk about your experience in user testing and developing prototypes and working with your teams organically in a way that everybody feels like they have a voice?
We did a study recently, like a multi-part kind of journal study and interview session, and then kind of all culminated in a big affinity diagram around couples and finances and sharing finances, and it is some of the most intimidated and scared I've been in my entire professional career, because untangling and asking questions, I didn't have to ask the questions, thankfully, that would have been terrifying, but some of the responses were just like mortifying, because those are two really difficult things, and when they intertwine, it can create really, really scary imbalances of power, even from just like the subtle stuff to like, oh, I have to have separate accounts because my partner has a gambling problem, and just like, how do you design for that? which I don't think we actually did that yet, because that one's really tough. But it's a huge part of our process. Actively, especially recently, we've taken a much more significant effort and built up a user research team that's been doing a ton of really incredible work. And we worked with agencies as well too that do great. But having that in-house has been, well, yeah. I mean, it's obviously great results, but it's also very, very scary because finance is very scary, and that shows through with people's interviews.
Excellent. And
yeah, I mean, I guess for me, like this is the first bank I've ever worked at. I don't think whenever at any point in my career leading up to this, I was like, I'm gonna go work at a bank. Look, but at this point, for me, like if you want to put a dent in the universe, Apple, Facebook, finance is not a bad one. And I think, that's the joke I make when I speak all over the world is like, I know when you want to hear about design and innovation, you want to hear from a guy that works at a bank. But that reaction is why I work there. No, but I think the first thing for me before I even agreed to come through the door was that we signed a deal with IDEO. Because I think the thing that I've discovered in my past iterations of my career is that design thinking, there is no greater Trojan horse to change an organization than design thinking. I think especially if you're talking about something where there is lawyers and regulators and a lot of other things that are suddenly involved with it, that part of what we had to do, like I said before, was to change thinking, not behavior. Because if it's new behavior on old thinking, we didn't really change anything. And I think the ability for us to partner with IDEO is we said, okay, look, we're going to spend the next year and we're going to start training the company. We're going to start as our group as being the catalyst who's going to start kind of like spreading this. But we also did this crazy thing of realizing that creativity is a team sport, which is what I think design thinking does so well, is that it gives, because if you ask most people, are you creative, they'll say yes. Are you a designer, they'll say no. But I think it gives everybody permission to come into that process, to participate. And so instead of me going to legal or a regulator or somebody like that and saying, will you approve this, yes or no, black or white, be a part of it. Come be a part of the process. And then I can tap into just the base thing that like people will psychologically support what they're a part of. And so I think like for us, that was a massive transformation, was just the ability to just kind of say, look, creative isn't a department anymore. And that this is going to be kind of the thing that we're going to use, and I think that we've seen that. We're just kind of throughout the organization, that methodology is the reason why people come to us. The design and all the other stuff is a byproduct, but the ability that anybody can participate, and you can use it from org design to app design to get stuff done is powerful.
Right. So I mean, really, design is much more than just pixels and pretty pictures and artwork and fonts and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said for me, design is a byproduct of creativity. I think there are a lot of them. I think if you're a successful team, I think that was what design thinking let us do. Because I think the place where most internal teams fail, Citi's an aircraft carrier. It is big. It does not turn quick. So again, but I think that there are advantages to that as well. But I think that that's what it let us do, was to be able to kind of say, okay, look, we can come in and we can start to make that difference, that no longer is our team about deliverables. Because deliverables made our team a commodity. If it's about ideas, if it's about thinking, that's a critical asset. And I think that's the change we've been able to affect in just a single year's time, is just based on that thought.
That's excellent. So Ryan, I have this question for you. How are big banks keeping up with faster, more nimble startups that are disrupting the industry?
Absolutely. I think for Capital One and for me in particular, it really starts with a focus on talent. I mean, obviously as designers, and the practice of design becomes valued by many industries, and we're kind of a hot commodity. It's really about trying to attract great people. And I think in terms of big institutions, which you can relate to, obviously, I think one of the things that we think is powerful in Capital One is when we create great products and services for our customers, we can get those into the hands of millions of people. You launch something, suddenly tons of people are impacted. The work that you're trying to do, the idea of trying to positively impact the way people relate to their money suddenly has scale. Additionally, obviously, big institutions have resources and stability. And again, I think another sort of thing that I've been wonderfully excited to find out about Capital One is we are a founder-led company, and because of that, our founder helps to create momentum from the top down, in addition to sort of that idea of design and innovation permeating just from the people who are practicing it, but we also have support from the top of the organization.
That's excellent. And Apeksha, you are a disruptor in this industry. Tell us about what you guys are doing to totally disrupt finance?
So I guess we're not a bank, and we're not trying to be one. Wealthfront is, I think our mission is really simple, is to, bring sophisticated financial advice to people like us. So we're really in the personal wealth management space. And when I was learning a lot about what the industry is about today, it just made me angry. Because I was hearing things like, if you have to be a client at Goldman Sachs, you need a minimum of like $15 million to even be a client there. And then, if you have to hire wealth management services from Schwab or Fidelity, you have to have a minimum of $5 billion. And so it was just like, oh my God, like this is crazy. We all need this type of service. And so really it is about bringing a lot of these exclusive services down market to people like us. And we're disrupting that through essentially automating something that is today a human service. And we're automating through algorithms to create an advisory experience that's completely technology driven. Most of the big bets out there are essentially creating more of a hybrid solution where you still have that human interface and technology is aiding that, but we've taken the stance that we'll go full digital and really sort of bring this sophisticated advice to a big group of people like us, and that's really the only way to scale to make it affordable.
Great, and I'm going to present this to the group. What will become, or what is and will become, table stakes in regards to design in the finance industry in the coming years?
Something, sorry about that, twice now.
So you're good.
Something as simple specifically as focusing on is, I think mobile apps, especially a lot of the other bank mobile apps, have gotten really amazing, and you could definitely say they're full featured, but really having the full experience of your entire primary account, primary relationship all available there, whether it's opening, closing accounts, support in the app, all these things, and not having any of these kind of like back doors or shortcuts, calling a number or going into a branch. And Simple has the benefit, at least we call it that, of not having branches, because we can never rely on that as another option. And so we're kind of like, that limits our feature set as opposed to giving us an option to go out somewhere else. I think that's going to be a big one too, where everything entirely can happen on mobile, the entirety from like start to finish, which is a huge push for us in the coming years, is getting more account types and features and all these things that are necessary to complete someone's financial life, and doing it entirely on mobile wherever possible, not like letting yourself kind of recede onto like, well, this one will just be on the web or this one will be in branches or anything like that. Second part of that, since I'm already talking, deeper integration. Like I'm looking at my mobile, and Apple's releasing all sorts of new SDKs. So is Google, of course. Letting you throw Uber into the Map app and all these kind of like cross-app things. And we've been doing a ton of talking with our development team, mobile, about what is possible. There's still not a lot of it happening, but the reality is that you can do these really crazy deep integrations with things. Like our app could integrate with Foursquare or something like that in this cool way where you're using the ecosystem of what's existing on your phone and integrating that with your bank in the other direction as well. That's something I don't see a lot of, but I would love if someone, including Simple, did that. And I think could eventually, deeper integration like that could eventually become table stakes. And that exists on web too, through more like API-based stuff. But that, I think, will be a norm within a few years, is my guess.
And Ryan, you had something to say on this?
I mean, to echo your point, I think a great mobile experience, a full feature set that you can access from your smartphone. That's arguably either table stakes now, or that's probably table stakes now. I think I sort of see notifications as something that people expect now, and in the future, the ability to actually act upon the notification, so you don't actually have to kind of drive forward several steps in the experience. You can simply kind of respond to what you need to, whether it's a fraud event or something like that. I think that comes to the forefront. I think about something like, we as Capital One have lots of different types of business, so the idea of, sort of single sign-on or seamless account management seems like it's, should be expected, but it's not as easy to deliver on that as it might be. But I think that's, going to be an expectation in the future. And then finally, thinking about sort of the general concept of, like, I guess I would call it omnichannel. Omnichannel is a sort of a term that's applied a lot in retail around kind of seamlessness of connecting different channels. And with regards to finance, just making sure that, let's say you talk to an agent, that's reflected on the mobile application, and you do something on the mobile application, the agent knows about it, and so on and so forth, so that everything is interconnected very easily. And I think people are going to expect that sooner rather than later.
Great. Apeksha?
Yeah, I actually think, like, broadly, when we think about finance, there are two things, and you guys touched upon this. There are financial transactions, and then there are financial decisions. I think a lot of work is happening around, enabling financial transactions on mobile devices. So there's peer-to-peer, solutions out there like Venmo and PayPal. There are, banks are making it easy for you to deposit through your mobile devices. But I think very, very quickly we'll see more and more of these financial decisions actually happen through mobile devices. In fact, I think mobile will probably become the interface to our entire financial life. So currently, a lot of our clients, they tell us, I need like a full-size web browser with multiple tabs open to make an important financial decision. And really, if you think about it, a large screen and multiple tabs is inherently not required to make a decision. It's really an artifact of a no better solution out there, and points to a workaround where all your information is essentially scattered, which is why you need all of those tabs. So in the future, I think, now imagine if all your information, all the data that you need to make a decision was in one place. You'll end up making a much better quality decision. You'll make it a lot faster, and you'll also find it way more convenient. So I think more and more financial decisions will start to happen on our mobile devices that otherwise seem very complex.
Great. And I'm going to present this again to the group. How does your team approach the balance of affording a deep, multifaceted set of tools for customers while maintaining a delightful and light user experience? I mean, Stephen, you guys have a wealth of things, right, at Citi that you could probably speak to.
Yeah, no, I think that's the challenge, right? Is because I think that especially when you talk about, because I think the two things that people most struggle with, like the number one cause of divorce, the number one things that probably the most aren't honest with themselves about are their health and their finances. And the challenge with that is, because of that, no consumer is one-dimensional, especially if you have the amount of services that we have, right? And I think that's the challenge, is that I can't assume that the reason why any of us go to the app is the same. And I think that, for me, a lot of it is looking at, because I think the trap that a lot of places have fallen into is the fact that so much of it is about focusing on servicing, which I think is what we just touched on a bit, which I think gets you into a feature war. And I think a lot of it, because it's servicing, focuses on kind of like, where am I at? What do I need to do right now? As opposed to if we transition it over to a relationship, to understand that what your needs are change over time, that how we can look at and understand that, because I think that the experiences that will be the ones that win are the ones that move to that relationship, that have a better understanding of taking a various sets of social cues, various sets of different cues of what are going on, and to try to help give you the information when you need it. Because I think that there's still a fundamental flaw in a lot of the experiences that still says, you go dig out what it is that you need. And again, I think obviously there's regulatory and other problems that come with that, but I think the more we can get to that proactive content curation, the more that we can look at how do you move it towards being a relationship where there is value that is driven beyond kind of like servicing, then I think that's where it is. Because then I think, because a lot of it is, yes, there's how do we make it more simple in a navigation, but I think that kind of misses the point of something kind of like the longer term of what we're trying to get at. So I think a lot of it is, how do we establish that North Star of where we want to go, and then start to work back that into tangible things, so it's not, because I think the trap that I've seen on a lot of other client-side teams I've been in, where it just doesn't turn into science fiction, right? Looks great, makes for a great video, put it on YouTube, everybody oohs and ahs, go show it at South by. You're not going to build it, you're not going to ship it, or if you do, it's going to be some neutered down version that nobody's going to care about. And I think that to me is the big difference, is like letting stuff go out the door that is something that people actually want to use. So that's why I said is I think that's that challenge of how do you at scale, because I think that's the challenge is what's the navigation that's going to encompass everything we have?
Right, and you talk about relationships. I mean, much of the financial industry's relationship with consumers has been based on trust and longevity, right? So how can startups and organizations like yours in this realm use design and design thinking to create trust with their consumers?
I mean, my answer would be empathy. Again, I think that's one of the tenets of design thinking. I think that's one of the biggest things is like get out and walk a mile in somebody's shoes. Talk to the person with the gambling problem. Like it can be tough to watch sometimes, but there is no substitute. And again, I think like that's one of the things that we've established is design is subjective, especially if I'm coming in and forming a team at a 204-year-old company, and we've had this for a year. I'm bringing a subjective, debatable thing into this team. So every Thursday we test, because that's not debatable. Every Thursday, no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're working on, you put it in front of consumers, you ask them what they think. Because then all of a sudden it's not debatable. Then there's a fact check, then there's a grounding, then there's a reality to what it is we do, and then it creates an empathy around that. Because I think there's no substitute for that, but then I think also it allows you to be agile, to think, to not do the common mistake of, oh, well, we'll put it in front of consumers a year after we've developed it, after we've sunk so many millions of dollars and political capital that nobody's gonna tank it, and we're gonna launch something we don't like. But so again, I think that there's part of that of just how do I get everybody to fail faster?
Right, and Ian, could you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, I mean, being more of a startup bank, you know, how are you guys building trust with your consumers?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the like startup and fintech space, and which is it's good because it's this community now, which is really nice. And I think that if everyone in that community, Simple, Wealthfront especially too, if all of us stay above board and like have that kind of unified front of trustworthiness and good press and all these things, that's going to help quite a bit. I mean, with recent big bank scandals that'll go unnamed, there's a lot of talk about incentives. We talk a lot about that at Simple too and have since day one. One of the things that happened when I was first interviewing for the job, which was as a front-end engineer at Simple 6+ years ago with the founder, he said something along the lines of that I think is probably said in every tech interview, probably, not to be too critical, but it's the way he said it really resonated. And he said something along the lines of, I think I was asking like a standard, just like shitty startup good question of like, well, I don't want to work at a bank. Why would I want to work at a bank? It's probably going to become evil because that's what banks do. And he said, well, okay, whenever we're making big decisions, business-wise, whatever, we'll always just decide on whatever's best for customers. And again, like no one would not say that. But it felt like he really meant it, and I can attest to 6 years later, that's like a huge, deep part of our culture, and the incentives we create are the entire company gets one set of incentives and goals, so people are not operating against each other, and the values of the company, empathy being one of them, are really important and felt throughout the whole company. And so it's the kind of thing where like sometimes newer people will come in and they'll say some ideas that are pretty negative to customers, and it's not like they get like lashed at or anything like that, but it's like pretty much immediately gets quieted down just because the white blood cell of our culture, whatever, just kind of like pushes it out. That's been really, really helpful to set up some very appropriate incentives and keep us frosty and on the right side of things. And hopefully just all of the technology space and how that intersects with finance will do that as well, because a few of those get knocked down and it's going to be hard for everyone to trust the thing on their mobile app that doesn't have a branch or whatever, Surface, like brick and mortar is something they should really use. So that's what we got to try and do.
And Ryan, as myself being a recent departure, I'm sorry, from Capital One. I was a Venture Card Rewards member for many years and enjoyed it very much. But
we'll get you back.
I hope so. And that's what I want to ask is how are you going to get me back?
I can't make specific comments about that. We'll talk in the
Fair
green
enough.
room.
Fair enough.
Love what you said about the white blood cells of culture. I mean, as far as the issue of trust, to me, it's interesting because you posed the question sort of how do startups and smaller organizations get trust? From my perspective, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, but big banks are fairly reviled in many ways. Like you got the cable company, the government, and big banks kind of in the trust hierarchy.
Healthcare.
Of healthcare. I think one of the things that makes me proud to work at Capital One is sort of internally we have a standard that our products and services should be something that we feel really good about recommending to our family and to our friends. And that's a very easy to understand standard. And we're also kind of really empowered all throughout the company if we see something to say something, to basically we see a practice that appears to be malicious to customers, or even malicious might overstate it, but something that's going to ultimately be negative for customers. We're not just allowed to say something, but we're really expected to kind of raise that flag and to let other people know that we're kind of anticipating or seeing a problem, and really then we go out and fix it. So I think ultimately trust is something we have to earn every day, no matter whether you're big or small. So we have to do that in sort of how we deploy our products and services, the kind of culture that we have, and ultimately just showing people day in and day out that we have their back.
Great, and you talked about government, right? You talked about rules and regulations. So, Apeksha, how much do regulations and rules shape your design process? What does the balance look like for your team?
Yeah, we have to deal with that every day. I think really overall as designers, our fundamental intent is to create sort of the least amount of distance between intent and action, right? And the popular perception is that regulation's just going to get in the way of that, which actually I don't believe is true. We feel very comfortable designing with regulation. The fundamental intent is to protect consumers through regulation, and that kind of aligns perfectly with our philosophy. Every time a product team starts working on a new product, we engage the compliance team from day one. And in this process of engaging with a compliance team, one of the things I've learned is their first instinct is to map out sort of a traditional process that was defined by probably a 200-year-old institution, pre-internet, and they kind of say, like, this is how it's done in the industry. And in that moment, one of the things we've learned to do is to ask a simple question, like, just tell us what's the law. And once you ask that simple question, really, as we realize that our job is to build something that abides by that law. But more importantly, it's to design new systems and processes that make everything much easier for our clients. And that's the only way we can actually build a company that's truly modern. So regulation, I've realized, is sometimes just represents sort of a legacy process, and it's really about challenging it.
Great. Did anyone else have anything to add?
No, I guess I'm just to add on a little bit. I think, for us, there's always that creativity is about constraints. And again, I think if you can make them a part of that process, I think that the challenge for probably the bigger organizations is the fact that how do I balance going in and saying, okay, the regulators and legal is a constraint, but at the same point, also kind of saying, okay, look, I'm just not gonna, I need to see the forest for the trees and not just simply accept that the way it's always been is the way it's always going to be. And I think, that's been part of what we've done is even, it's a very tactical example, but like when we launched an app update at the end of last year, there was one flow that used to be 68 fields. Let that sink in. 68, and we didn't understand why people wouldn't use it. But now I think that like when you work with legal and compliance and things like that, it's now 5. And that's what I said, but part of it was like, okay, it went from like 68, then it was 50, then it was 40, but it kept going back and kind of, and again, you just kind of say, look, we're gonna work on this together to be able to do that, but that's that tipping point of like, okay, when, absolutely, we have to protect consumers, that's what it's there for, but at what point is all of that, because so much, and this will be like the one thing that gets tweeted, is like, I just think that so much process is like the residue of like stupidity and lack of communication. And I think that so many organizations have so much process that has been built up over so much time because somebody couldn't talk to somebody else, because somebody did something wrong, because somebody, and again, I think that there's so much of that internally leads to that like forest for the trees where it's like, well, this is the way it's always been. And so again, I think there's that balance between, okay, what do we legally need to do? What do we need to protect consumers? What do we need to do that? And then what is just the residue of too many years of people not figuring out how to get stuff done?
So lots of red tape.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw one last thing in on that. Like, I think you guys both said things that resonated with how we kind of approach it. Regulation is a constraint, but I think the solution to it is co-creation and bringing in the lawyers and the compliance people early on in the process, and kind of akin to what you said early on about involving them in the process. I think my sort of analogy that I always use is like no one wants to throw themselves off of a train that they're on. So it's really about getting them on board with the idea and kind of making everybody understand, hey, we're in this together. This is about co-ownership, co-authorship. And then you're kind of proceeding together and you're looking at like, what is the spirit of what we're trying to do, instead of saying, here, we're a team, we're going to work on it over here, come bring you something, and then you get out your red pen and slash it up. So
Great. So I'm going to present this to the group again. The products that you design serve a wide variety of people in different financial situations. How do you guys gain empathy with your customers? They're in many different situations. And have any of these efforts led to any innovation for people that you didn't expect to be a part of this group?
I mentioned this already a little bit, but I'll kind of echo the importance of having a research group, a research practice at your organization, whether you're working with external agencies and have strong relationships with them, or you bring it in-house like we've done recently. That's helped immensely. It's just talking to customers. It's for me, coming kind of from product design mostly, whenever I go through these, basically every time my perception of what the problem is, and definitely who we're solving for, but just where we really have to focus, or the language I'm using almost more than anything else, always shifts pretty intensely. It's not like a drastic 180 shift, but it's a refinement and a massaging of the message and an understanding of where the priorities are and the focus. We were just talking with people recently about just savings in general, and this is a pretty small study, but just almost everyone there said something along the lines of like, oh, I don't have savings, which we know that's kind of like an unfortunate truth. But as we got a little bit deeper, everyone was talking really heavily about like, oh, we'll have a rainy day fund, which to me at least is basically savings. I mean, that's kind of how I think of my savings, but it's just all about the language we're using, and that's going to impact product stuff in the future because we at least know like what to speak to, and that's like scraping the surface of what research really gets you, but it still is a really important thing you get basically every time you try and do it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I think it's, again, a lot of it about changing things. I think one of the big things for us is just getting people to come into a situation like that with a problem to be solved, not a solution to be vetted. Because I think in so many cases, like, product people or things like that would show up and go, well, this is what we want to do. Have you talked to anyone? It's like, well, no, this is what so I think part of it is just simply don't assume that you're every consumer. And that, we're going to go in and that there's an inherent fact that we also have to accept the fact that we're not going to find something innovative by knowing where we're going when we start. And I think that makes people scared as hell. Because I think if you look at bringing in Agile into an organization, if you look at bringing in design thinking, the fact that we're going now someplace and we're actually going to make it up as we go along is part of where you have to get people, because I think as creatives, we're used to like, we'll just go flying off the cliff and assume we're not gonna like Wile E. Coyote it when we hit the bottom. And we'll build our wings on the way down. Most of organizations and leadership are not used to that much at all. And so I think there's a lot of getting them accustomed to that fact of like, how do we actually go through and do that, and that uncertainty is actually okay, that's part of the process. It doesn't mean that we don't know what we're doing. It doesn't mean that, but it just means that like, we're going to go into this with our eyes open and our options available, and then kind of not assume every time that this is what it's going to be.
So I'm going to do sort of a rapid answer from you guys, and you can't name your own company in this question. But if you could name one company or maybe a feature or something that you guys really seen in the financial industry that you really feel like is pushing, things forward, that's moving the needle, what would it be? Apeksha, why don't we start with you?
I think everyone's still figuring it out, but I think Digit is pretty cool.
And can you just briefly describe for the audience what they do?
Digit is really sort of taking your savings completely out of your mind space, completely. So it automates your savings for you, and you just it's a completely text-based interaction, It'll ask you a question. If you at some point you're like, okay, I want to save a little more, you just text it back a number, and it takes care of it.
Very cool. Stephen, do you have one?
She stole my answer.
Oh.
I'll say digital, but I'll say it for a different reason. Because I do think that since it's text-based, I think what they tapped into was something really interesting, which was the fact that part of, I think, the problem that people have is the fact that there is still the edifice of a financial institution in front of so many things. I think even when you look at so many apps, the logic that was true on your paper statement, that was true on your email, is true on your website. And I think what they did is just said, okay, look, we're going to strip all that away. And by making it text and by giving it a personality where, like, I talked to the founder, like, they program it to be able to tell jokes or to have a sense of humor. So again, I think, like, just the ability that every single day they work on its responses. They go in and they work on that so that it feels like I'm texting with a friend, because I put it into a medium where it doesn't feel like an app. It feels like an environment that I'm very comfortable in. And wherever I'm in that environment, I'm talking to another person. I'm talking to one of my friends. So I think that for me, just the ability to do that mind shift of just saying, okay, look, we can build a bank in a chat space and be able to do that, the part of it for me was where it really does something cool.
Cool. And Ryan, did you have any that really impressed you?
So instead of answering with a financial example, I think where my mind goes is just companies, essentially like Amazon, Uber, Apple, with seamless experiences. This is sort of maybe a no-brainer kind of a thing, but to me the key thing there is raising consumer expectations on what is possible in a way that doesn't leave financial services out of the mix. So financial services necessarily have to respond, necessarily have to get more intuitive, more seamless in what they deliver. Like, you see something like Amazon Go, being able to go into a store, check out without any lines or anything like that. To me, that's the kind of thing that has scale, or will eventually have scale, that actually creates pressure on financial services to move forward, in addition to the startups that are pushing the whole industry forward. But it's like big things that have scale, that hit tons of consumers, that basically just make it impossible for financial services companies to not respond, to not get better, materially and dramatically.
And Ian?
I like the robo-advisors, not just pandering, I promise. For me personally, that opened up investing and thinking really aggressively about retirement in a real way, where before I was just always scared off by all the existing tools and platforms and just generally kind of yucked out by them. And now these new tools exist that are really, really fun and pleasant, and things I interact with basically almost every day, even though it's technically not what you're supposed to do, but I do anyways because they're so well designed and nice, and I think that's, really, really great.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for some of the questions, but we do want to put it to the audience. So does anybody in the audience have any questions for these guys? Okay, we've got one here, I see. Hi. I think you might get a mic over there as well.
Hi. You were speaking about deep integration earlier, and I was wondering, how do you deal with people's privacy with the concerns of usability and deep integration altogether?
I don't think I have a genuine, real answer for that. What we've kind of set up here before, transparency and honesty, helps quite a bit. I think if we were going to go down that road where we were kind of exposing more financial data than people might be typically comfortable with, we would just want to make sure to message and know that people are understanding exactly what we're doing. But that's a huge challenge too, because that's that balance between how much do you expose and how wordy do you make something versus how kind of seamless and simplistic. I think that's going to be a really tough one. I'd have to think about that a lot more before I had a genuine answer. Anyone else?
Oh, we got one way in the back.
We got him ready.
No, they can totally go first. That's cool.
Oh, sorry.
He was closer. Oh, yeah, we got back there. Cool. Thank you.
How do you see fintech innovating in 2020? So we have companies like Square, Venmo, TransferWise, and they're simplifying our lives right now. But what do you see is coming next?
I think, I don't know for sure, but I think obviously interfaces and the ability to access financial services through not just your smartphone, but through voice interfaces and Internet of Things is probably going to become much more ubiquitous. And essentially distributing services to tons of different devices is probably where things will go now. But who knows what the future's going to hold.
Yeah, I mean, I get, it sounds like a cop-out. I guess I've learned not to answer that question because, look, we're not going to know. We're all one keynote away from like having to run in a totally different direction because if somebody releases something. So what I would say is I think, I mean, it's just, for a while everybody thought like Second Life and Google Glass was the jam. So like, there's a lot of companies that do that and you can do that. But look, what my answer would be is I think that there's a lot of chasing what's next, right? And you can put a lot of bets into what that is. The thing that I would say is, for me, it's more about putting your team and you're putting your organization in a place where it's agile enough to react, right? Because I think that there's something about agile, not as a methodology, but agile as a thinking is more of where we need to be. Because the what's next, like, right, we could take everybody in this room, we could sit down, we could create $1 billion idea of what we want to do in 2 years, right? The only thing that's going to be true now is that idea is not going to work in 6 months. And again, so I just think that there's some part of that. And I think this is where a lot of companies get caught in what I said before about, we're going to define what's in 2020. It's science fiction because you're going to get there in 3 years and it's not what your product's going to be. So again, I think that there's some part of, look, you can't be blind to what's going on. But there are forces, the Apples, the Googles, the things like that influence this industry. If they decide they want to make a shift and come in here in a different way, we all have to react to that. So again, I think that it's kind of a non-answer, but that's why I said is I think that's why I don't define that the way I used to.
There was someone I missed before, but I couldn't see you.
Hey there. So hopefully no cop-outs with this question. Not hating. Just saying. I'd love to hear from where design sits within the organization and who you report up to. I work at NASDAQ, so obviously I don't report to Matthew McConaughey or anyone from Wolf of Wall Street. But that being said, how do you guys structure design? How does that work? Who do you report up to? And how is that positioned within the company? And how does that affect the work you do?
I think that's actually a very good question. Most times, design usually reports into product. In our case, I report to the CEO, and I think it speaks really to how design is perceived inside the company. So the 3 core pillars for us is design, product, and engineering, and then research, which is actually the financial PhD side of research. And all of these 4 groups directly report to the CEO. So it's really equal.
So for me, design is the only team in the entire global consumer bank that actually cuts across everything that we do. That was done very purposely, and it was done kind of with the inception of this team. I report into our CMO, but it's partnering with our tech partners and products, so we don't report into product. It's basically kind of like the 3 legs of the stool. But a lot of it was done very purposely. 1 is so the design was empowered. 2, that we could have a unifying effect across what was going on, because there's a lot of little individual layers of things like that. And I think it was put at that seniority, because I think the thing that I've discovered about organizations that big, you can get the senior buy-in, I can get my team buy-in. It's all the stuff in the middle that's the problem. And I think especially big companies that enjoy an escalation culture, the ability to have it that way and position that way saves me a lot of headaches, because when they want to escalate to their boss, my answer is, great, I'm going to see at the top. Because then that way we're empowered in a different way, and we're not commoditized. And so again, I think that we've seen a lot of success in terms of it positioning that way, and the fact that, like I said, it's not to just kind of one part of the global consumer bank.
So at Capital One, we use a structure which we kind of refer to as a centralized partnership. We have one design team which encompasses all the designers, researchers, and essentially some of the specialty practices. We've got Steph Hay, who's amazing, leading our content strategy. So that's all within the design organization. We have dedicated teams that are kind of organized by lines of business. And then, culturally, we sort of come together across those to share best practices. Really, it's one team that has kind of different areas of focus. We also have an enterprise team, essentially, that has a kind of pure play horizontal design focus that goes across the lines of business. And I personally am part of the larger card design team and report up through a wonderful woman named Heather Winkle. If she's watching, please. Yeah.
Our current setup, which I'm pretty happy with, is we have two kind of design groups. One is on the product side, so product is product management, user research, and product design. We have another group of designers on the brand side, and we are kind of collectively a meta team called the creative team, meet on a weekly basis, are all pretty chummy, that kind of stuff. The collectively between those two different teams, it's about a dozen people, so it's relatively small, which makes things easier for sure, but that's our structure.
Great. Do we have any other questions? I think we got one all the way in the back.
Thanks. Hey guys, thanks for taking the time. I was just wondering. I think right now I feel like I feel like we all understand like we're on the precipice of like a lot of wider adoption of some new emerging technologies. I know you all talked a little bit about mobile and making mobile much better and integrated experience into people's lives. But as these technologies, such as conversational UI, Alexa, obviously, Google Home, as well as things like VR become more widely adopted, do you see that affecting the work that you do on the day-to-day basis? And if so, in what ways do you think the financial industry will have to adopt to that?
I feel like we need a rock, paper, scissors or something. Look, what I would say is I think, one, back to Agile is the new smart. I think, two, a lot of it is just simply rethinking what does an interface mean. Because I think if you work with Alexa, if you work with voice-driven, it's mapping out a completely different interaction model. I think a lot of it is, as you look at Apple TV apps, you look at Alexa and you look at things like that, it's now banking in a much more public way, that it's not on a small screen in my hand. It's me saying it out loud. And again, like everybody's talks about voice-driven interfaces for your banking. Who here wants to do that on the subway? So again, I think like the VR thing, there was a movie called Lawnmower Man like 30 years ago. I think like that's a technology that's been the next big thing for like 40 years. So again, I think that, that's part of those shifts that have to go on and you have to adapt. I think a lot of it, at scale and with your money is driven by consumer adoption. So again, I think, I know Zuckerberg and things like that have made bet on Oculus and things like that. We'll see if it pays out and if the content, if the consumers go there. But I think that's a lot of it is just, again, the ability to react to, as people want to do that or things like that, how are we nimble enough to be able to react to what that is and not just kind of jump at the shadow of doing it because it's new?
I think it's,
I think overall, in terms of technology, AI definitely will affect the financial space tremendously. AI, I think, is something that we all use in some form in software even today. And what you touched upon earlier is really serving people a piece of information that they need in the moment is what's going to really drive behavior change. And I think, in this case, technology is really going to sort of drive that. So AI, I think, is definitely going to impact financial experiences.
One last thing. I think it's less about the technology and what the technology can do, and fundamentally design will take the same skills that allow us to be human-centered, to understand what people need, what's valuable to them, how they see the world, and it will take those and just apply those in different ways in the future, whether it's VR or those kinds of things. I think it's fundamentally the same skill set of empathy and understanding and problem solving that will be applied in the future, and the technology may kind of shape those outputs, but the skill set will kind of remain the same. So it's really about same methods and sort of same mindset and mentality, but with a different set of outcomes based on what the technology will be or could be at that time.
Great. So I think we have a few questions from the live stream. So.
Okay, I'm going to read from the World Wide Web. Merlin asks, what are the hooks that motivate users to use financial apps every day? Don't all go at once.
I think this is mostly from personal use, but we've seen this at Simple too. If you can map your personal life to your financial life and see a real connection there with customization, make it kind of addictive, almost like a journal, that's been really effective for us and definitely for me personally, and for things like it's not just a robo-advisor, it's not just investment, it's about when you can retire and being able to see that and track that, and maybe drive yourself a little crazy, ups and downs. but in a very pleasant way. I think that's got to be one of the keys.
Two thoughts on this. I'm going to go first this time. So two thoughts on this is just one thing that we've seen effective. Capital One has a well-regarded wallet application, and that really is heavy on real-time notifications and sort of things related to your spending, and that really has a big pull for people using the application, which is great. But I would say the idea of hooks and getting people to use your application might be a little bit short-sighted, because really it's about them accomplishing their goals and getting them what they need. And so if you are trying to get them to use your app for the sake of it, or a certain number of times just for the sake of it, I think you should really be evaluating more on whether you're helping them achieve the outcomes they want to achieve versus how many times do they open my app, how many times do they, go in here. That to me seems like a metric that can lead you in a direction that's not necessarily serving the people you set out to serve.
Yeah, I was essentially going to make that point where I think a lot of social media companies have there's this expectation from other technology companies that what you're optimizing is engagement. But when it comes to personal finance, that's absolutely not true. In fact, the goal is really not to get your clients to engage with you every day. No one is... the more peace of mind you have, you likely worry about your finances less and engage with your money less. And so our goal is really to engage our clients only in a moment when we think we actually have some value to deliver and they need to pay attention. Otherwise, we view it as bad behavior.
Yeah, and I guess to build on what you said a little bit, because I think that it's a balance, right? Because on the one hand, when you talk about retirement, there's the base problem that being responsible isn't fun. So there's a little bit of how can we make it fun and addictive and do it every day for something that isn't fun? So I think that there's an inherent tension there that I think you've got to kind of recognize. But I think the other part of it for me is I think the hooks are the things that kind of draw you in are part of it. But I think it's thinking about it differently, that there's kind of an onboarding and an unboxing into it, but this isn't a linear experience. That it is kind of pulling them into loops of varying degrees, and then as I have them in there, how do I keep them engaged? How do I kind of set something for them to be able to work towards? How do I reward that and then kind of refresh what that experience is and continue to be able to kind of work through what that is? I think the challenge is, again, that's going to be different for everybody, but I think it's also a little bit of what we said before, that there's also just some part of the technology isn't an idea. That it has to pay out to what people need. It has to pay out to that value and empathy, and that if all it is that it is leading with a technology, or if it's leading with a hook, partially, that's where we get into trouble with this stuff. And again, I think that's where it starts to become more challenging, because it's a different version of showing up with the solution already done. We're leading with an execution, not a value proposition or problem to be solved.
And did we have any others from the live stream?
Indeed. Also, as a reminder, if any of you were nervous to speak in the microphone, you can ask all of our panelists questions after the panel over a beer here in this room. So Levin asks, what user behaviors have you seen changed by making financial apps beautiful or more usable?
More engaging, looking at it a lot more. I kind of reference it a little bit, but with my retirement stuff, I look at it almost every day because I find it really pleasant. We see that with people on Simple as well, because they can edit the transaction data, because they can check on the progress of their goals, because they're mapping their life and their future to it. They engage with it quite a lot more. I hope that that's not some more of a neuroses thing. I hope that's building situational awareness, so they're building up that confidence in their finances, and not just we certainly don't want to gamify the app, kind of attention for attention's sake. So hopefully, by seeing that kind of steadily coming back from the really pleasant experience in the design, we're building good patterns. We got to measure that though, really.
Excellent. Well, is that it for questions? Great. Well, I wanted to thank our panelists so much for being here. Let's give them a round of applause. And I wanted to thank all of you for coming out, and all of you on the live stream as well. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and we will be around to answer a few more questions. So please stick around and say hi. Thank you.